Is it something you want to invest in your table? Like, you can do it ways, like you said, that are interesting, require the exploration and the social pillars. And that maybe that's fun for you as the GM and maybe for the wizard, but how does that affect the fighter, barbarian, rogue, right? Does it slow down the game for those characters and give them less interesting things to do?
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. All right, so what are we talking about today, Dave?
Today we're going to be talking about this meme here. And, it's really weird because the wizards have, wizards and spellcasters don't have a lot of limitations. One of them they do have is material components for their spells. And then, like, Wizards of the Coast and the rules kind of goes out of their way to ignore those rules or tell you how to ignore those rules. And then GMs will go, well, okay, take it even a step further to where it almost doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. Every spell has whether it needs verbal, somatic, or material. And if it has material, what specific items it needs. And if it doesn't have a gold cost associated with it, like, it's just assumed, okay, you need to have one of these things, which may or may not exist in a component pouch. It's a really weird scenario.
So with that, let's just get into the rules of material components so we can really dive into the discussion.
Casting some spells require particular objects specified in parentheses in the component entry. A character can use a component pouch or a spellcasting focus in place of components specified for a spell. But if a cost is indicated for a component, a character must have that specific component before he or she can cast the spell. If a spell states that a material component is consumed by the spell, the caster must provide this component for each casting of the spell. A spellcaster must have a hand free to access the spell's material components or to hold onto a spellcasting focus, but it can be the same hand that he or she uses to perform the somatic components. Your focuses are crystal, orb, rod, staff, wand, ... because there's more.
Yeah, so there's a few limiting factors in casting spells. One of them is, does it require material components? If it doesn't have a gold cost, well, then your spell component pouch has it, and it never runs out. You get it once, and you use the same one from the beginning of the game until the end.
It's just really weird for this, low cost. It's like, this is what you need to cast every single spell, so long as it doesn't have a little GP next to the item.
Does anyone homebrew this in their game and make it more like healer's kits where there's only a certain number of uses? Once you use them, you need to refresh your spell component pouch. But even if you were to do that, your arcane focus would make that moot anyway. And then the other limiting factor is you just need a hand to either hold the focus in or draw forth the spell components, the material components with.
I think like a good kind of option would be to kind of break down the cost and look at what spells require material components that don't have a GP cost and make like a first level, a second level, and do it by spell level and like what kind of things are required. So like I know wizards and spellcasters already have a higher cost associated with casting spells because they have to get those reagents. But, they do so much extra damage, over what everybody else does. Like, all right,
And not just extra, more options as well.
Right, yes, more options. So, like, I think it's worth the cost of, like, well, what if we made this kind of thing and, like, okay, well, your focus could also be along the same lines. Like, you have to empower your focus to be able to handle, the next level of spells.
Well, before we go even further, let's address, like, the title of this video is, are material components lame and why, right? So, why do we think they're lame? Do we think they're lame?
I think it's lame because, like, it's easier to just use a focus because it covers everything and you don't have to worry about, what's there. Yes, like, on rare occasions, you'll see a person like Liam from Critical Role for, playing Caleb throughout, the second campaign. Like, he always knew, like, I guess he had notes next to, I'm going to cast this spell. I pull out my, insert whatever.
Cricket leg.
Like, all right, that's kind of cool that, the character is smart enough to know that's what he needs for that particular spell. But as a player, I could not tell you what you need to do for any of the spells, because to me it's always easier to pull out of focus, and there's enough focus options to be like, oh well, this character uses a rod, this character uses a wand, this character uses an orb, that character uses a book, that character uses a pen. Like, there's so many different things that are options that it's like it doesn't matter.
Well, even if you don't go with the focus and you just go with the pouch, it's not like you have to say what's in it. It's just this amorphous thing. It's a pouch. It's got everything you need in it. Why do you think GMs ignore this rule and players ignore this rule? Why doesn't it really not come up in our games?
Because the component pouch doesn't offer uses. Like, once you have it, it's there, and it doesn't really add much to the game. Like, yeah, for the novelty's sake, I enjoyed what Liam did, but it didn't change the effect on the battlefield. Like, if you had a component pouch that offered consumable things that offered some kind of additional aspect to casting of the spell, whether it could allow you to cast it quicker or allow you to kind of do what sorcerers do, like, you could have a little bit of fun with it from that aspect. But
so that's kind of a good point, right? Like, what about the idea of,
and we can go into some more specifics about other ways to do it, but how do we do it in our games?
In our games, we do it pretty much, I feel like it's pretty typical of what most people do, is they ignore it unless there is there's a costly component. And sometimes it's the player that brings it up. Sometimes it's the DM that brings it up. Like, the cleric's like, I'm going to cast Revivify. And the GM might be like, do you got that 300 gold piece of diamond?
That's the big one. Like, that one, I think, a lot of players know, anything that's bringing someone back from the dead, you need those diamonds. Revivify, Resurrection, it's all there,
Even in our own games, I know, sometimes the cleric's like, all right, everyone, you got to buy your own 300 gold piece valued diamond so you can get revivified if the need is there.
I know, in your game, there was times that a fight broke out and somebody used an area effect thing during the battle, and when it was over, there was 7 dead bodies. Fight lasted 2 or 3 rounds. And I was able to bring back 7 people from the dead, and I was over 2,000 gold that my character spent. And when I brought it up multiple sessions later, it's well, you never told anybody that you did that. They just assumed that they got damaged and you healed them. No. So it was a lost opportunity for my character, but it's something that he, of course, would do if he had the material components, so he did it.
Yeah, it also depends on the character too, how much, whether they care about the gold as much,
right,
or they're like, hey, I might need to do this again, but I can't. What do you mean you can't? You just cast a spell, right? No, I'm broke. You're broke.
And again, that's something that Critical Role, they as a group know, and they're always pulling their money and, oh, are there diamonds? Are there diamonds? So they look to make sure that there's an aspect of, having that resource for when it's necessary.
Yeah. So I guess the final question and thing for us to address really is, can this be improved upon, or should it be improved upon?
I think it should. I think there is, some nuance to what's there. I think, that early example that I had of you could have a component pouch that does it for level, level of the spell level. Mm-hmm. And if you had to acquire, okay, well, all right, well, I got access to 9th level spells. I need this 9th level component pouch. And, you could technically be well, I'll get the things and add them too. And it makes it become a necessity of planning. Well, I'm going to make sure I might get access to this, so maybe I should buy this.
This works in 2 different ways in my mind. The way I describe it is, one is you need, when you're maxed out, you need 10 component pouches, one for all the levels, including cantrips. Mm-hmm. and they all have a different cost associated with it, probably going up as. Or one is you have one big spell component pouch, but as you level up, you need the one for second level spells and lower, third level spells and lower. Right? It's still one pouch, but it just gets more costly. And you like if it's ninth level, then any spell you could cast with it. But like also it's like how much do they weigh? If you have 10 of them, are you carrying? I think it's like a pound or half a pound. So it's like 5 to 10 pounds of spell components you're carrying around with you as a wizard, which I've seen many a wizard dump their strength, so their combat, their carrying capacity isn't quite that of other things. They're gonna like have to hire a Nodwick just to like have their spell components.
But I think it could be something that it could add to the game by like, all right, making survival or nature checks to go find and acquire certain specific reagents. And, as opposed to saying, oh, well, I'm only going to focus on this spell. I've done my research in advance. I know this is what I want to develop, because technically a wizard is messing with formulas during short and long rests as they're trying to learn new spells, and it's not until they get enough power and gain that level that they get access to it, that you could be like, well, I need this type of thing. And maybe you could like kind of tailor, well, it says I need a cricket leg, but well, I found this grasshopper. Does that work? So like you could have more fun and exploration style things, and maybe in your world, like you've modified some of the things where there's options, and maybe if you use the wrong thing, you take a leg from like the wild magic table, that something crazy can happen. You still cast your spell, but here's this extra effect. Maybe you make up your own wrong component kind of thing. But you could have a lot of fun with it. Or, you could, offer, that idea of, well, you can get, other kinds of components that are consumed in the casting, but offer things like, those sorcerous meta magic stuff.
So one, I like the idea of a magical component pouch or magical components, especially magical. I've used them in my own game where I've created magical components that are consumables. You can use them, and you can use them to enhance your magic and your spells, which is cool. Or they would work as the costly components depending on what you want it to do. So the tricky thing is to make it interesting, and as part of it is maybe a tax on wizards, because they do get access to a lot of power, and their only limiting factors are these spell component for materials, as well as the cost of putting spells in their book. All right, and in the early levels this could be really harsh, but after you hit a certain level, depending on your play style, it no longer matters. Like you have more than enough gold to take care of this and do it. But at the end of the day, like, the amount of power that spellcasters bring to the table, maybe they should be taxed a little bit and kneecapped a little bit. But is that fun? Is kind of gets into the problem of, is it something you want to invest in your table? Like you can do ways, like you said, that are interesting, require the exploration and the social pillars. That maybe that's fun for you as the GM and maybe for the wizard, but how does that affect the fighter, barbarian, rogue, right? Does it slow down the game for those characters and give them less interesting things to do? So, like, these are all things that you have to kind of take into consideration.
Well, like, I could look, at this, in a way to say, like, all right, well, what if, you have to go collect your reagent from this area? Well, the wizard and maybe one other person is doing a skill challenge while there's a fight going on, and the fighter has to kind of defend you while the barbarian is attacking, while you're trying to extract this thing. Like there's definitely ways to get everyone involved and make it happen and interesting and challenging at the same time.
Yeah. So I also was thinking of this idea of a bargain value spell component pouch, your regular spell component pouch, and like maybe your better improved spell component pouch. And like the bargain one is like, is it a wild magic table you're going to roll on, or is it, they're like meta magic feats that get applied, or meta magics that get applied to the spells, except for enhancing them, they make them worse.
Detract them, like it instead of empowered, like, okay, you're gonna roll twice and take the lower damage, or it's gonna do -1 damage on the spell per die, each die with a minimum of 1. So you could definitely have some
instead of
wonkiness.
lasting 10 minutes, it only lasts 5 minutes, or instead of a minute, it only lasts
30 seconds.
30 seconds, right? You can play with things like that, and then like the improved one, maybe you come up with some other things. Obviously, especially if like you decide like to tweak the whole economy of spell components, but 5e tends to be all reward.
No risk.
Less risk.
Right.
No, it's all carrot, no stick for the most part when it comes to building the characters. But it's a little unfair because like the fighter can't fight without a sword.
Right.
So when you start limiting one of the very few limiting factors that the wizard has, it does kind of elevate those classes a bit more.
So I would like to make a system that makes the component pouch more interesting and more useful, but the way it's presented now, like, there's no reason not to choose a focus, because it's like
and there's no reason not to just ignore it all pretty much while you're playing.
Yeah, pretty much. Hey, you like these videos? Others like it, as well as all the great content over on Nerdarchy.com. Why not come check us out on Patreon and throw us some support there?
Articles like, play your next 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game with Snake Magic. There are new Snake Magic flavored spells over on Nerdarchy.com.
But hey, you're looking for some other stuff to augment your game? Why not check out Dark Paths Pools of Bliss? The 5th edition content in this book explores new, darker paths for adventurers to follow. Beginning down one of these dark paths leads to power, but at a perilous cost. Heroes of the dark face insurmountable odds and challenging decisions, whether it's worth the cost to fight against such forces by tapping into the same source of insidious influence as their terrible foes. A new establishment in the city promises fun and entertainment, the likes of which you've never experienced. The bliss tempts revelers and pleasure seekers, the ultimate prize for those who risk a roll of the dice or a deal from the deck, their greatest desires. But how much is too much? Adventure scenario for 4 5th-level characters, 3 new creatures, including the Enigmatic Dealer, 3 new subclasses, the College of Mirrors, the Order of the Peacock Wizard, and the Way of Excess Monk, as well as 4 new magic items.
Let us know in the comments if you've ever used magical spell components in your games, what kinds you've used. Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below with the Nerdarchy community.
If you want to help Nerdarchy appease that YouTube algorithm, go ahead and hit that like, share, subscribe, click on that notification bell.
Quick reminder, we drop new videos here on the channel Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, so come on back. Can't wait till then. No worries, we got you covered. D&D 5e spells, 3 deadly spells with verbal components only.
So until next time, stay nerdy.